You think being poor meant going hungry in the 1970s? Think again. African American families turned empty pockets into full plates, creating dishes that stretched pennies while filling bellies and warming souls. Let's dig into 60 African American recipes from the 1970s you ate if you were poor. Creamed corn made from canned corn and evaporated milk became the sweet, creamy side dish that children especially loved, prepared from affordable ingredients that most households kept in pantries. Black mothers would drain canned corn, then simmer it with evaporated milk, butter, or margarine, and a touch of sugar until it thickened into rich, creamy consistency. Some added a sprinkle of black pepper for contrast, while others kept it sweet and simple to please children who might reject more complex flavors. The evaporated milk created richness without requiring expensive heavy cream, making this dish accessible even to families on tight budgets. A single can of corn could be stretched to serve 8 people when prepared this way, and most families needed only 3 or 4 cans for Thanksgiving gatherings. The dish was make-ahead friendly, reheating beautifully without separating or losing its creamy texture. Sweet potato bites topped with mini marshmallows were dessert-like appetizers that blurred the line between side dish and treat, their orange flesh and white topping creating visual appeal that drew children like magnets before dinner was served. Mothers would bake sweet potatoes until soft, then scoop out the flesh and mash it with butter, brown sugar, cinnamon, nutmeg, and vanilla extract until smooth and creamy. The sweetened sweet potato mixture was spooned into mini muffin tins or shaped into small balls and placed on baking sheets, each one topped with a single mini marshmallow that would toast golden brown. As they baked, the marshmallows puffed up and turned golden, creating that characteristic toasted flavor that children associated with campfires and summer fun. In the 1970s Black households, these bites represented creativity, taking traditional candied yams and reimagining them as finger foods children could grab. Pinto beans and ham hock were one of the most dependable winter meals a Black family could make in the 1970s, a pot that simmered slow and steady while the cold pressed against the windows. Pinto beans were cheap and came in big bags that could last for several meals, and a single ham hock turned them into something hearty and deeply flavored. Mothers soaked the beans overnight when they could, then dropped them into a large pot with onions, water, and the ham hock sitting right in the center like a small anchor holding everything together. As it simmered for hours, the ham hock released its salt and smoke, and the beans drank it in until the whole pot thickened into something that felt like warmth itself. Kids wandered in and out of the kitchen, asking if it was ready yet, even though they knew it never was until dinner time. When it finally came together, it filled bowls with a richness that did not match the price of the ingredients served with rice or cornbread. It stretched for days, and each day tasted deeper than the last. Pinto beans and ham hock were a winter promise that no one would go to bed hungry. Fried chicken gizzards were the crunchy golden treasures of the holiday feast. Cheap but packed with flavor, they were marinated in buttermilk, dredged in seasoned flour, and fried until crisp. The sizzling sound in the skillet was pure Christmas music in its own right. They were passed around on paper towels, eaten with hot sauce, laughter, and pride. For those who grew up on them, nothing compared to that bite, crispy on the outside, tender within. They were a reminder that good food didn't need to be expensive. It just needed to be made with care. The gizzards soaked up spice and seasoning like memories soak up time, rich, sharp, unforgettable. They brought people together in the kitchen where stories flowed as freely as the frying oil. The smell alone could pull neighbors to the porch, smiling at the familiar scent of comfort. For many families, these gizzards were a pre-dinner snack, the reward for waiting through hours of cooking. It was finger food, soul food, and heart food, all in one. Fatback and greens created the foundation of countless soul food meals, with cured pork fat transforming bitter vegetables into something genuinely crave-worthy and absolutely delicious. Thick slices of fatback were rendered slowly in cast-iron skillets until the fat melted out and the remaining meat crisped into cracklings worth fighting over. Collard, mustard, or turnip greens were added to the rendered fat, along with vinegar, hot sauce, and seasonings, then cooked low and slow for hours until tender. The greens absorbed the pork fat's richness, becoming flavorful while maintaining some of their natural bite and texture throughout cooking. The potlikker that resulted was considered liquid gold, sipped from bowls or soaked up with cornbread hungrily. In the 1970s, fatback was among the cheapest items at any butcher, often costing less than butter per pound for families watching every penny. Fatback and greens represented maximum flavor from minimum investment, proving that fat wasn't the enemy, but rather the key. Rice and gravy made from pan drippings was one of the most reliable winter meals mothers turned to when there was not enough food left in the house to make anything bigger. Every drop of flavor mattered in those days, so nothing from a pan was ever wasted. Once the meat was gone, she would take the browned bits left behind, the tiny pieces of onion or seasoning clinging stubbornly to the bottom, and add water or milk to coax out every bit of richness. Slowly, the drippings dissolved, turning the liquid into a thin but deeply flavored gravy that smelled like a full dinner even when it was only a fraction of one. The rice went on the stove next, cheap, filling, and dependable, the kind of food that made sure no one went to bed hungry. Kids watched the steam rise from the pot, knowing that the gravy would soak into the grains and turn the simplest bowl into something warm and comforting. This was winter cooking at its most honest, taking what you had and stretching it without apology. The meal did not pretend to be fancy, but it held families steady through nights when the cold crept through the walls and the fridge felt painfully empty. Rice and gravy tasted like thrift turned into care, like a mother's quiet determination to make something out of almost nothing. Sausage balls made with breakfast sausage, cheese, and biscuit mix, baked into savory spheres that children popped into their mouths like candy, their crispy exteriors giving way to soft, cheesy, slightly spicy interiors. Mothers would combine raw breakfast sausage with shredded sharp cheddar cheese and dry biscuit mix, kneading everything together until well combined. The mixture was then rolled into balls about an inch in diameter, arranged on baking sheets with space between them, and baked until golden brown. As they baked, the fat from the sausage rendered while the cheese melted, creating savory, flavorful bites that were crispy outside and tender inside. In the 1970s, Black households, sausage balls represented easy entertaining, a recipe that could be made ahead. Children loved sausage balls because they were perfectly portioned, required no utensils, and delivered breakfast flavors in snackable form. Chicken quarters baked instead of turkey gave families affordable poultry that still felt special, allowing Black mothers to serve bird on Thanksgiving without spending $20 on turkey. Leg quarters sold for less than 50 cents per pound in the 1970s, and when bought in bulk bags, they became even more economical. Mothers seasoned them heavily with paprika, garlic powder, black pepper, and whatever herbs the cabinet held, then baked them slowly until the skin crisped golden and the meat stayed tender. The dark meat remained moist even with extended cooking, making them more forgiving than turkey breast. A 10-pound bag of chicken quarters could feed 20 people when accompanied by generous sides. The drippings collected in baking pans became bases for gravy, ensuring nothing went to waste. Children actually preferred chicken to turkey because it was familiar and easier to eat. Baked chicken quarters taught families that tradition could be adapted. Salmon croquettes served as mini appetizers were crispy golden patties that children devoured while standing in kitchens, their hands reaching for more before finishing what they were already eating. Grandmothers would drain cans of pink salmon, carefully picking through the meat to remove bones and skin, then flaking the fish into mixing bowls where it was combined with chopped onions, bell peppers, beaten eggs, cornmeal, and seasonings. The mixture was shaped into small patties, pressed firmly to ensure they held together, then carefully lowered into hot oil where they sizzled and turned golden brown. The exterior developed a crispy crust while the interior stayed moist and flavorful. In 1970s, Black households' salmon croquettes were economical elegance, transforming canned fish into something special worthy of holiday tables. Children loved them because they were handheld, didn't require forks, and packed protein and flavor into every crispy bite. White beans with fatback were the slow-cooked winter miracle that kept Black families fed long before money ever showed up in the house. A small piece of fatback was enough to transform a plain pot of beans into something thick, smoky, and full of the kind of flavor that made you close your eyes for a second. Beans were cheap and dependable, stretching across multiple days when they needed to, which was most winters in the 1970s. Mothers would rinse the beans, pick out the broken ones, and drop them into a heavy pot with water, onions, and that precious slab of pork that melted down as the hours passed. The kitchen would smell warm and familiar, like hope simmering even when the world outside felt harsh. Kids knew beans meant full bellies, and they were thankful for that, even if they did not always say it. Served over rice or with cornbread, the beans thickened as they cooled, becoming even better the next day. Fatback was cheap, but its flavor made the whole meal feel bigger and deeper. This was the kind of food that did not just feed you once. It lingered, warmed, and strengthened. It tasted like survival learned across generations. Smothered cabbage with smoked turkey became side dishes so good they often overshadowed main courses, transforming humble vegetables into something truly special and crave-worthy. Cabbage was shredded and slowly cooked with smoked turkey wings, onions, garlic, and chicken broth until tender and infused with smoky richness throughout. The long cooking broke down the cabbage's natural sugars, creating sweetness that balanced the smoked meat's saltiness perfectly every time. This dish provided vegetables and protein together, making it nutritionally complete and economically brilliant for tight budgets. Turkey wings were affordable cuts that delivered maximum flavor from minimal meat, with bones adding depth to cooking liquid. In the 1970s, cabbage heads cost pennies and could feed 8 people when cooked with turkey wings as seasoning. The dish improved with reheating, actually tasting better the next day when flavors had fully melded into cohesive whole. Children who claimed to hate vegetables would eat this cabbage without complaint, won over by smoky, savory flavors. Cabbage and sausage skillet dinners were a working family's best friend during the holidays. One skillet, one flame, one meal that stretched to feed everyone. It was cooking at its most honest and generous. The cabbage sizzled in sausage fat until it softened and sweetened, the edges caramelizing just enough to give every bite a smoky flavor. Onions and black pepper added heat, and a dash of vinegar cut through the richness, bringing everything together. The smell filled the house, sharp and savory, calling everyone to the table. It was fast, cheap, and deeply satisfying, a dish that could make even a cold December night feel warm again. Kids would crowd the stove, waiting for their turn to be served, and mothers would smile quietly, knowing she'd made something hearty out of nearly nothing. It was food that didn't just feed the body, it fed the spirit. The skillet itself became a symbol of continuity, passed down like a secret recipe, its blackened edges carrying stories of every meal that came before. In that simple pan, there lived the rhythm of care, the sound of sizzling cabbage and love that never stopped giving. Fried bologna sandwiches elevated the cheapest lunch meat into something children actually requested, especially when the edges curled up, creating crispy cups filled with mustard and tangy pickles. Thick slices of bologna were scored around the edges and fried in skillets until the center puffed up and the edges crisped and caramelized perfectly. The meat was placed on white bread with yellow mustard and sweet pickle slices, creating sandwiches that were simple but satisfying in ways that transcended their humble ingredients completely. The frying transformed the bologna's texture and intensified its flavor, making it genuinely more delicious than the cold version ever could be. Mothers packed these for school lunches, and children ate them without complaint or embarrassment about their simple nature or low cost. In the 1970s, bologna was among the cheapest proteins available, affordable enough that even struggling families could buy it regularly for quick meals. Fried bologna sandwiches represented treats rather than poverty, showing that simple pleasures didn't require expensive ingredients. Stewed chicken gizzards were one of those meals that reminded everyone just how far a single, inexpensive ingredient could be stretched when times were hard. Gizzards were cheap, often sold in small tubs for barely any money, but they became tender and flavorful when cooked long enough. Mothers browned them first, letting the edges sear, then covered them in water with onions and garlic. As the pot simmered for hours, the gizzards softened into something surprisingly rich, their broth turning thick and savory. Kids learned to love the chewy texture because it came wrapped in the kind of gravy that begged to be poured over rice or mashed potatoes. The meal was warm, affordable, and filling, exactly what families depended on during winter weeks when money was thin and the cold was relentless. Stewed chicken gizzards were proof that cheap food could still taste like love. Pickled shrimp marinated in vinegar, oil, and spices created tangy, flavorful bites that adventurous children tried. The cold, tender shrimp infused with herbs and aromatics that made them taste complex. Aunties would boil shrimp until just cooked, then peel them and place them in jars or bowls where they were covered with a marinade of vinegar, oil, sliced onions, bay leaves, peppercorns, and sometimes lemon slices. The shrimp marinated for at least 24 hours, absorbing the tangy, aromatic flavors and developing a pickled taste that was both refreshing and sophisticated. The marinated shrimp were served cold with toothpicks for easy serving, the onions and bay leaves removed or left in depending on family preference. In Black households during the 1970s, pickled shrimp represented make-ahead convenience, appetizers that actually improved with time. Children who tried pickled shrimp discovered seafood could be tangy and bright. Okra stewed with tomatoes became the southern side dish that provided both vegetables and sauce, stretching fresh produce into enough servings for large families without requiring meat. Black mothers would buy okra when it went on sale during late summer and fall, freezing what they couldn't use immediately for Thanksgiving preparations. The okra was sliced and cooked slowly with canned tomatoes, onions, and whatever seasonings the cabinet held, creating thick, flavorful stew. Some people loved okra's distinctive texture, while others needed convincing, but most agreed the tomato sauce made it more palatable. The dish was economical because okra was plentiful and cheap during season, while canned tomatoes cost less than fresh vegetables during winter months. This stew provided vitamins and fiber that balanced heavier, richer dishes on Thanksgiving tables, making it nutritionally important beyond mere economy. Okra and tomatoes represented the kind of practical cooking that sustained Black families. Grits with red-eye gravy was the kind of breakfast that wrapped around you like a blanket before you stepped into the cold. Grits were cheap, easy, and filling, the kind of food that could keep a child warm through a long school day when the walk to the bus stop felt like a challenge. The red-eye gravy, made from pan drippings and a splash of strong coffee, added a flavor that was sharp and comforting all at once. Mothers made it quickly, stirring the grits until they were smooth and spooning the gravy over the top with practiced hands. The smell alone could coax a sleepy child out of bed. Kids loved how the gravy soaked into the grits, giving each spoonful a deep, savory taste. It was not fancy, and it certainly was not pretty, but it did what it needed to do. It kept families fueled when winter stretched long and money stretched thin. It tasted like early mornings, like care offered quietly, like the start of a day built on strength. Fried Spam with eggs became breakfast solution when bacon was too expensive and families needed protein to start long days of work and school right. Spam was sliced thick and fried until the edges caramelized and crisped while the center stayed tender, creating textural contrasts that made the processed meat more interesting and actually delicious. Eggs were fried in the same pan, picking up the salty, meaty flavors from the Spam's rendered fat for perfect combination. Together, they created breakfast that provided sustained energy and cost less than 50 cents to feed 4 people every morning. In the 1970s, Spam represented wartime ingenuity that continued helping families stretch food budgets long after rationing ended throughout the country. The canned meat didn't require refrigeration and lasted indefinitely, making it perfect for households with unreliable power or limited storage space available. Fried Spam with eggs represented pragmatism over pretension, showing that feeding your family mattered more than impressing anyone with fancy ingredients or sophisticated cooking techniques. Stuffed bell peppers with rice and ground beef were the definition of doing more with less. A single pound of meat could feed an entire family when mixed with rice, onions, and tomato sauce. The peppers, hollowed out like little bowls, held the mixture snugly before baking. As they cooked, their sweetness mingled with the savory filling, creating a smell that could make anyone hungry. They came out bubbling, tender, and hearty, their juices soaking into the rice until each bite was perfect. For Christmas dinner, this dish was both elegant and affordable, a main course that looked fancy but didn't break the budget. Families passed down their own versions, some adding cheese, others using leftover cornbread crumbs or diced vegetables for texture. The process of filling the peppers became a family task, with children helping scoop the mixture while mothers arranged them carefully in the pan. Served hot from the oven with slices of white bread or collard greens on the side, it was the kind of meal that made everyone slow down and savor. Stuffed peppers turned thrift into art, proving that even the humblest ingredients could create something worthy of celebration. Chitlins with hot sauce represented both celebration food and survival food, the ultimate nose-to-tail eating that wasted nothing from the hog. Pork intestines required hours of meticulous cleaning and preparation before being slowly boiled with onions, garlic, bay leaves, and vinegar until tender enough to eat. The process was labor-intensive, and the smell was unmistakable, filling entire city blocks and announcing that someone was cooking chitlins with pride. Despite the strong aroma, properly prepared chitlins had unique flavor and texture that devotees genuinely loved, especially with hot sauce and vinegar cutting through richness. They were traditionally served during holidays and special occasions, particularly around New Year's, connecting directly to slavery survival strategies. In the 1970s, chitlins remained affordable protein that fed large gatherings without breaking limited budgets for celebration. The preparation was often communal activity, with women gathering to clean and cook together while sharing stories. Chitlins represented cultural continuity, proving that even foods born from oppression could become sources of pride. Oxtail soup, back when oxtails were still affordable, was one of the richest winter meals a family could make without spending much at all. Before the cut became expensive, it was something butchers practically gave away, and mothers knew exactly how to turn it into a pot of gold. She browned the oxtails first, letting the fat render and the bones darken in the pot. Then came water, onions, seasoning, and whatever vegetables the house could spare. The pot simmered for hours, filling the kitchen with a smell so deep and savory it seemed impossible that the meal had cost so little. As the soup cooked, the gelatin from the bones melted into the broth, giving it a thickness that warmed the body and soothed the spirit. Kids waited for the moment when the meat fell off the bone with barely any effort, soft and tender from the long, slow heat. The soup stretched across days, tasting better each time it was reheated. It was rich, nourishing, and comforting, the kind of food that helped families push through the coldest months with something warm in their bellies. Oxtail soup was winter elegance built from scraps. Butter beans cooked with ham hock and served in small cups became hearty appetizers that filled hungry children before dinner, their creamy texture and smoky flavor creating comfort in every spoonful. Grandmothers would simmer dried butter beans with ham hocks, onions, and seasonings for hours until the beans became tender and creamy while absorbing the smoky, salty flavor from the meat. The finished beans were served in small portions in cups or bowls with small spoons, allowing guests to enjoy them without needing plates. Some families topped the beans with crumbled cornbread or a drizzle of hot sauce for extra flavor and texture. In Black households during the 1970s, butter beans represented soul food tradition brought to the appetizer table, showing that holiday food could honor heritage while fitting modern entertaining formats. Children loved butter beans because they tasted familiar and comforting, like Thanksgiving dinner in miniature form that warmed them from the inside. Fried pound cake baked with margarine instead of butter became the golden, dense dessert that could be sliced thin to feed many people from a single loaf. Black mothers would cream margarine with sugar and eggs, adding flour gradually to create batter that baked into cake with tight crumb and rich flavor despite lacking expensive butter. The cake lasted for days when wrapped properly, actually improving in texture as it sat. A single-pound cake could yield 24 thin slices when cut carefully, making it remarkably economical for providing dessert for large gatherings. Some women glazed their cakes with simple sugar icing, while others served them plain or with berries when fruit was affordable. Children loved pound cake because it was sweet without being overwhelming, while adults appreciated its versatility. Pound cake proved that basic ingredients could create impressive results. Miniature cornbread muffins with honey butter were golden gems that children popped into their mouths whole, the crumbly cornbread texture melting while sweet honey butter added richness. Mothers would prepare cornbread batter using stone-ground cornmeal, flour, eggs, buttermilk, and just enough sugar to balance the corn's natural earthiness, then spoon it into mini muffin tins that baked quickly. The muffins emerged from ovens with crispy, slightly caramelized tops and tender, crumbly interiors that begged to be broken open and slathered with butter. Honey butter was made by whipping softened butter with honey until fluffy and smooth, creating a spread that melted instantly when slathered on hot muffins. In the 1970s, Black households, these miniature cornbread muffins represented Southern hospitality in bite-sized form. Children loved them because they were individually portioned, making them feel like special treats rather than ordinary bread, and the sweet honey butter made every bite feel indulgent and special. Cracklin' cornbread was one of the most satisfying winter dishes you could make with almost nothing. Leftover pork cracklin gave the cornbread a salty crunch that made it taste richer than it had any right to be. Mothers mixed the cornmeal, eggs, milk, and bits of cracklin together, pouring the batter into a hot pan that sizzled the moment it touched the surface. The smell of baking cornbread filled the house, warm and sweet, even before it was ready. Kids loved the crispy edges most, the way the cracklin gave each bite a little extra weight. It was filling, high energy, perfect for nights when the cold tried to seep into the walls. Served alone or with greens, it worked as both meal and memory. Cracklin' cornbread tasted like thrift turned into pride, like winter hunger held back by skill and heart. Liver and onions delivered iron, B vitamins, and sustained energy through affordable organ meat that mothers understood was essential for growing children. Beef liver was sliced thin, soaked in milk to remove bitterness, then dredged in seasoned flour and fried quickly in hot skillets with butter. Onions were cooked low and slow until caramelized and sweet, creating natural sauce that balanced the liver's mineral intensity perfectly. Served with rice, mashed potatoes, or grits, liver and onions made complete meals that stuck to the ribs through long days. The smell filled entire neighborhoods, announcing dinner time and bringing families to the table with anticipation and hunger. Many children initially resisted the strong flavor, but persistent mothers knew the nutritional value was worth the battle every time. In the 1970s, liver cost less than half what ground beef cost, making it accessible when budgets were impossibly tight. This dish represented mothers' nutritional wisdom combined with determination to keep families healthy. Rice and gravy with pan drippings was the final miracle of the meal, the transformation of leftovers into something that felt brand new. Every Christmas dinner ended with a pan of drippings saved from roasted meat or fried chicken, whisked with flour and water until thick and velvety. Poured over soft white rice, it was comfort in its purest form. It stretched the last bits of the feast into another day, feeding everyone once more. The smell of that gravy simmering slow was the scent of resourcefulness, of mothers refusing to waste even a drop of flavor. With each spoonful, families tasted both the struggle and the triumph of the season, a meal that said, "We made it." The gravy soaked deep into the rice, coating every grain in flavor and love. Sometimes a few scraps of meat were stirred in, just enough to make it hearty. It wasn't just a leftover, it was a symbol of care, of never letting anything go to waste. Even when the plates were mismatched and the portions small, the warmth of that dish filled every heart around the table. Canned salmon croquettes were one of the most dependable winter meals because canned fish was affordable and easy to store. Mothers mixed the salmon with onions, egg, cornmeal, and seasoning, forming patties that hit the hot skillet with a satisfying sizzle. The croquettes browned beautifully, crisp on the outside and soft inside, carrying just enough fish flavor to feel special without costing much at all. Kids waited eagerly for them, especially when served with rice or bread on the side. The sound of the croquettes frying was almost as comforting as the smell, a steady reminder that dinner was close and that warmth would soon spread across the table. Sometimes mothers added leftover vegetables or herbs to stretch the mixture even further, turning one can into a feast that lasted the whole evening. It was a meal that tasted far richer than its price suggested, a reminder that skill mattered just as much as ingredients. Salmon croquettes were winter comfort mastered in a pan, a testament to cooking that found joy inside limitation. Green tomato slices served with remoulade sauce were crispy, tangy bites that introduced children to Southern traditions, the cornmeal coating providing crunch while the tart tomato inside stayed firm and flavorful. Mothers would slice green tomatoes thick, dredge them in seasoned cornmeal mixed with flour and spices, then fry them in hot oil until golden brown and crispy. The remoulade sauce was made from mayonnaise, mustard, pickles, capers, and spices, creating a tangy, creamy dip that complemented the fried tomatoes perfectly. Each slice was served hot with a small dish of sauce for dipping, the combination of temperatures and textures making every bite interesting. In 1970s, Black households, fried green tomatoes represented end-of-season resourcefulness, using tomatoes that wouldn't ripen before frost to create something delicious. Children loved fried green tomatoes because they were crispy like French fries but tasted tangy and different, expanding their understanding of what vegetables could be. Buttermilk biscuits served with sorghum syrup became the dessert alternative when pies and cakes felt too expensive, turning breakfast bread into sweet treat that satisfied cravings. Black mothers would make extra biscuits specifically for serving with syrup after dinner, knowing that warm bread with sweet topping could substitute for fancy desserts. Sorghum syrup was cheaper than honey or maple syrup, providing dark, complex sweetness that paired beautifully with buttery biscuits. Children loved this simple dessert because they could eat with their hands, breaking open hot biscuits and drizzling syrup into every layer. Adults appreciated how leftover biscuits from dinner could be repurposed into dessert without additional cooking. This wasn't elegant or sophisticated, but it provided that sense of completion that dessert offered. Biscuits with syrup proved that satisfaction came from simplicity rather than complexity. Okra and tomato winter stew was a humble pot that brought together two ingredients. Black families knew how to stretch through lean months. Canned tomatoes were cheap and lasted forever, and frozen okra kept well enough to make it into most winter meals. Mothers combined them with onions, seasoning, and sometimes a leftover bone or bit of smoked meat if the house had some. The stew bubbled slowly, thickening as the okra softened and released its juices, turning the tomatoes into a sauce that coated every spoonful. Kids sometimes teased each other about the texture of okra, but they still showed up with bowls in hand when the smell filled the house. It was warm, savory, and surprisingly filling, a dish that carried families through the days when fresh produce was impossible to afford. Served with rice or cornbread, the stew became a complete meal, one that tasted far richer than its ingredients suggested. Okra and tomato stew was a winter companion, steady and dependable. Cornbread dressing made from scratch became holiday tradition that stretched expensive turkey into meals feeding extended families gathering from across cities and states for celebration. Day-old cornbread was crumbled and mixed with sautéed onions, celery, sage, chicken broth, and eggs, then baked until golden on top and creamy inside with perfect texture. This wasn't stuffing cooked inside the bird, but Southern dressing baked separately in pans, allowing better control over texture and flavor throughout. The cornbread absorbed the broth and seasonings, becoming savory and moist with crispy edges that everyone fought over at dinner tables. Families made huge pans because this was as important as the turkey itself, sometimes more important given its cultural significance to gatherings. In the 1970s, cornmeal was cheap enough that making cornbread for dressing didn't stress budgets even during expensive holiday meals celebrated properly. Each family had their own variations, with recipes guarded and passed down through generations of women who took pride in their dressing. Homemade egg custard pie was the quiet pride of many 1970s Christmas tables, a dessert that tasted like warmth itself, made from pantry basics, milk, sugar, eggs, and a touch of vanilla. It didn't need luxury to be loved. Mothers whisked the filling by hand until it was silky and smooth, then poured it into a flaky crust rolled out with practiced patience. As it baked, the sweet scent of custard filled the house, signaling comfort was on the way. The top browned just enough to form a delicate crust that cracked under the spoon. It was sweet but not too sweet, soft but never soggy, the perfect ending to a heavy holiday meal. A dash of nutmeg on top made it festive, like snow dusting a golden sky. Served with coffee or sweet tea, it was a dessert that gathered silence and smiles in equal measure. No matter how modest the celebration, egg custard pie made the night feel special. Bacon-wrapped water chestnuts delivered crispy, salty, and slightly sweet bites that children fought over despite not knowing exactly what water chestnuts were, the bacon exterior and crunchy interior creating mysterious but delicious combinations. Aunties would drain cans of whole water chestnuts, wrapping each one with half a strip of bacon and securing it with toothpicks before arranging them on baking sheets. Before baking, each bundle was brushed with a mixture of brown sugar and soy sauce that caramelized during cooking, creating a sweet salty glaze that coated the bacon. The water chestnuts roasted until the bacon was crispy and rendered, the fat dripping away while the sugar coating turned golden brown and slightly sticky. In Black households during the 1970s, bacon-wrapped water chestnuts represented sophistication borrowed from magazines, recipes that seemed fancy but remained simple for home cooks. Children loved them because bacon made everything better. Giblet gravy made from turkey or chicken organ meats transformed parts that many discarded into rich, flavorful sauce that elevated every dish it touched. When families could afford even a small bird, Black mothers saved the neck, liver, heart, and gizzard, chopping them fine and simmering them with onions and celery until tender. The organs added depth and richness that plain flour gravy could never match, creating sauce with body and complexity that tasted like hours of work. Some women strained out the meat pieces for texture-sensitive children, while others left everything in for those who appreciated authentic preparations. The gravy was thickened with flour mixed into the drippings, creating perfect consistency that coated everything without being gluey. Poured over dressing, mashed potatoes, rice, or biscuits, giblet gravy made every component taste richer. This was resourceful cooking at its finest, using parts that cost nothing extra. Ham biscuits made with country ham and soft dinner rolls became handheld sandwiches that children devoured, the salty ham contrasting perfectly with the sweet, buttery rolls that held everything together. Mothers would slice country ham paper thin, the intensely salty, cured meat packed with flavor that needed only small amounts to satisfy, then tuck the slices into soft dinner rolls that had been split and buttered. Some families brushed the tops of the assembled biscuits with melted butter and baked them briefly to warm everything through and create slightly crispy tops. The combination of salty, savory ham with soft, slightly sweet rolls created perfect flavor balance that kept people coming back for more. In 1970s Black households, ham biscuits represented Southern tradition, appetizers that could be prepared ahead and served at room temperature. Children loved ham biscuits because they were familiar comfort food in easy-to-eat form, requiring no plates or utensils and perfect for grabbing. Black-eyed pea soup was the kind of dish that filled the house for days, getting thicker and richer each time it was reheated. Peas were cheap, long-lasting, and dependable, making them perfect for winters when groceries had to stretch far beyond their limits. Mothers simmered them with onions, leftover bones, and simple seasoning, letting the pot bubble low and slow. The smell was earthy and familiar, the kind that drifted through the rooms and made the whole house feel warmer. Kids did not always know what went into it, but they knew it kept them full when the wind outside made the walls creak. By the second or third day, the soup had settled into a thick, hearty stew that hugged the stomach served with cornbread or rice. It carried families through weeks when money was gone, but determination remained. Black-eyed pea soup was survival food, hope food, winter food. It was a pot that never stopped giving. Hopping John, served at midnight on New Year's Eve, embodied hope and superstition blended with practical economics, as black-eyed peas, rice, and pork came together in tradition-laden celebrations. The peas were cooked with rice, smoked pork, onions, and peppers until everything melded into one unified dish with layers of texture and deep flavor. This wasn't just food, but ritual, with families believing that eating Hopping John at the year's start ensured prosperity throughout coming months ahead. The tradition likely originated with enslaved Africans who combined West African rice cooking techniques with ingredients available on plantations for survival and celebration. In the 1970s, the dish remained affordable because black-eyed peas and rice were among the cheapest staples available in any store. Families made enormous pots, knowing that leftovers meant extended good luck rather than waste that would bring bad fortune. Hopping John represented cultural continuity, African heritage meeting American survival, creating something uniquely Black American that sustained both bodies and spirits. Chicken and dumplings were the essence of warmth on cold December nights. A whole chicken was boiled down with onions, celery, and carrots, creating a broth that was both rich and healing. Then came the dumplings, flour, water, and love, dropped in one by one until the pot was full. They puffed up soft and chewy, soaking in the flavors of the broth until every spoonful felt like a hug. This dish didn't require expensive ingredients, just patience and a steady hand. Families would gather around steaming bowls, blowing on their spoons, savoring each mouthful. It was the kind of meal that filled the house with peace and gratitude. Chicken and dumplings were about more than food. They were about home, about mothers who turned cold kitchens warm with nothing more than a pot and prayer. Chitlin dressing appeared on tables when traditional stuffing felt too expensive, turning what others discarded into something deeply satisfying. Cleaned thoroughly over hours, chitlins were chopped fine and mixed with cornbread crumbles, celery, onions, sage, and chicken broth stretched as far as possible. The mixture baked until golden on top while staying moist inside, creating dressing that carried intense flavor and connected families to ancestral cooking traditions. Black mothers prepared chitlins as acts of both economy and heritage, knowing their grandmothers had done the same during harder times. The smell was unmistakable, but for those raised with it, chitlin dressing meant Thanksgiving in ways plain bread stuffing never could. A single batch cost less than $3, yet fed the entire gathering. Young people might have initially resisted, but after that first bite, most came back for seconds. Chitlin dressing taught lessons about respecting traditions. Deviled eggs with paprika and pickle relish were the appetizer children fought over at every Thanksgiving gathering, their bright yellow centers dotted with red paprika creating tiny works of art. Grandmothers would boil dozens of eggs the night before, peeling them while warm and slicing lengthwise before scooping yolks into mixing bowls. The yolks were mashed with mayonnaise, yellow mustard, sweet pickle relish, and vinegar until perfectly creamy, then spooned back into egg white halves. Paprika sprinkled on top added color and smokiness. In Black households during the 1970s, deviled eggs symbolized celebration, appearing at every gathering from church dinners to reunions. Children would hover near the kitchen, waiting to sneak one before dinner, knowing that once adults arrived, these treats would disappear. The combination of creamy richness, tangy pickle brightness, and paprika's heat satisfied everyone. Sorghum syrup oatmeal was a winter breakfast that stuck with you, warming you from the inside out before school or chores called you into the cold. Oats were inexpensive and dependable, and sorghum syrup added a deep, earthy sweetness that made the meal feel more special than it cost to make mothers cook the oats slowly until they thickened, then drizzled the syrup over the top so it melted into the warm bowl. Kids stirred it in eagerly, watching the syrup swirl through the oats until the whole thing turned golden. Each bite was sweet, hearty, and comforting, the kind of breakfast that kept your stomach full well into the afternoon. It tasted like quiet mornings in a warm kitchen while frost gathered on the windows. Sorghum syrup oatmeal was a winter gift, simple but memorable. Cornmeal mush with butter and syrup started countless mornings as hot cereal that cost pennies and filled stomachs before school or work began. Cornmeal was slowly stirred into boiling water with salt until it thickened into smooth porridge, requiring constant stirring to prevent lumps from ruining texture. The finished mush was served hot in bowls with butter melting into pools on top and cane syrup or molasses drizzled over for sweetness that made mornings bearable. This provided sustained energy from whole-grain cornmeal that kept children focused through morning classes without hunger distracting them. Leftover mush was poured into pans, chilled until solid, then sliced and fried the next morning for completely different textures. In the 1970s, cornmeal bags cost less than $1 and lasted for weeks of breakfasts, making it economically essential for large families. Cornmeal mush represented resourcefulness meeting practicality, showing how basic ingredients could provide real nourishment that sustained entire generations through hardship. Sweet tea and Kool-Aid punch were holiday staples that turned every gathering into a celebration. Sweet tea, brewed strong and poured over ice, was the pride of Southern homes, sweetened so perfectly it bordered on dessert. Kool-Aid punch, on the other hand, was for the kids, bright, bubbly, and made with whatever flavor packets were on sale. Sometimes the two would meet in a big bowl with sliced oranges or lemons floating on top, creating a festive mix of color and sweetness. These drinks stretched sugar and smiles alike, poured into mismatched glasses, and passed around with laughter. They were cheap to make, but priceless in the way they brought people together. Grandmothers guarded their tea recipes like secrets, claiming the perfect sweetness was by feeling, not measuring. Ice clinked, kids giggled, and everyone drank until the pitchers were empty. You could taste sunshine, family, and memory in every sip. Sweet tea and punch weren't just beverages. They were community in a cup, cooling the spirit while keeping hearts warm. String beans canned in bulk and seasoned with bacon drippings provided the vegetable side that stretched pennies into portions for crowds, proving preserved vegetables could taste homemade. Black mothers bought cases of canned green beans when on sale, often paying less than 30 cents per can, then transformed them by draining the packing liquid and cooking them down with saved bacon grease. The bacon drippings, carefully stored from breakfast preparations throughout the year, added smoky richness that made even plain canned vegetables taste slow-cooked. Onions sautéed in the drippings first created a flavor base, then the drained beans went into simmer until they softened and absorbed all that porky goodness. Some women added a pinch of sugar to balance saltiness, while others threw in a ham hock if available. The beans weren't crisp tender but cooked until completely soft, the way older generations preferred vegetables. Children usually won over by these bacon-flavored beans. Rumaki wrapped chicken livers and water chestnuts in bacon created sophisticated bites that curious children tried, the crispy bacon exterior making them willing to taste the unfamiliar liver that turned out mild. Aunties would cut chicken livers into bite-sized pieces, marinate them briefly in soy sauce and ginger, then wrap them with water chestnut slices in bacon before securing everything with toothpicks. The bundles were arranged on baking sheets and roasted until the bacon crisped and rendered, the fat keeping the liver moist while adding smoky saltiness that transformed the organ meat into something special. As they cooked, the soy sauce caramelized slightly, creating a sweet savory glaze that coated the bacon. In Black households during the 1970s, rumaki represented culinary adventurousness, recipes borrowed from magazines that brought international flavors to holiday tables. Children who were brave enough to try them discovered that bacon really did make everything better. Fried cornmeal mush was the kind of breakfast that turned leftovers into something special after a night of freezing temperatures and thin blankets. Cornmeal mush was simple, made by cooking cornmeal with water until it thickened into a heavy porridge. But the magic happened the next morning. Mothers sliced the chilled mush into thin rectangles, laid them in a hot skillet, and fried them until the edges crisped and the centers stayed soft. The sound of the mush hitting the pan was quiet but comforting, a soft sizzle that meant a warm breakfast was on the way. Kids loved the contrast in each bite, the crunch on the outside and the creamy middle inside. Sometimes syrup went over the top, sometimes powdered sugar, and sometimes nothing at all because the flavor was enough. It was cheap, filling, and warm. Everything a family needed before stepping out into the cold, fried cornmeal mush was a winter morning ritual that turned scraps into sustenance and taught kids that even the simplest food could be worth remembering. Ham bone and bean soup transformed the leftover bone from Sunday's ham into entirely new meals that fed families for days with minimal additional ingredients needed for completion. The bone was placed in large pots with dried beans, onions, celery, carrots, and water, then simmered for hours until the beans were creamy and the remaining ham fell off the bone into the soup. The marrow and residual meat flavored the entire pot, creating rich soup that tasted like prosperity despite costing almost nothing to make from leftovers. This represented the ultimate waste-nothing philosophy, ensuring every part of expensive Sunday ham served multiple purposes throughout the week for maximum value. The soup was served with cornbread or crackers, providing complete protein from beans and ham combined in perfect proportions. In the 1970s, dried beans cost pennies and lasted months in pantries, making them reliable staples for families on impossibly tight budgets. Ham bone and bean soup showed how one ingredient could serve families repeatedly when prepared thoughtfully. Neck bone stew with potatoes was the kind of meal that made you grateful for slow cooking. The bones simmered for hours, releasing deep, rich flavor into the broth until the meat fell off with just a nudge of the spoon. Potatoes, onions, and carrots joined in, soaking up every drop of goodness and turning soft in the smoky, savory liquid. By the time it was done, the stew smelled like home itself, a scent that wrapped around you like a blanket. It was hearty, cheap, and nourishing, stretching a few ingredients into a feast that could feed a whole family. The bubbling pot filled the house with warmth, fogging windows and drawing everyone closer to the kitchen. A slice of cornbread on the side was all it needed to complete the meal. Families gathered around bowls of neck bone stew like it was the centerpiece of the season, savoring each bite and soaking up the gravy with bread. It was proof that simple food could be deeply soulful when cooked with patience, purpose, and love. Meals like this didn't just fill stomachs, they filled generations with gratitude. Neck bone gravy over rice became the foundation when turkey was beyond reach, transforming the cheapest cuts into liquid gold that satisfied entire families. Black mothers would simmer pork or beef neck bones for hours with onions, garlic, and bay leaves until the meat felt tender and the broth turned rich. The bones cost pennies per pound at butcher shops, yet held marrow that created gravy with body and soul. Women knew that patience turned scarcity into abundance, letting those bones bubble on back burners from morning until afternoon. The finished gravy was thick, savory, and packed with protein from the shredded meat. Poured generously over white rice, this combination stretched to feed 20 people when turkey could barely serve 8. Children sopped up every drop with cornbread, while adults appreciated how resourcefulness created satisfaction without shame. Neck bone gravy wasn't poverty food, but proof that love and skill mattered more than money. Cocktail sausages wrapped in flaky biscuit dough emerged from ovens as golden crescents that children grabbed from cooling racks, burning their fingers but unable to wait. Mothers would roll out refrigerated biscuit dough, cutting it into strips before wrapping each small sausage like a tiny gift and arranging them on greased baking sheets. The wrapped sausages baked until the dough turned golden brown and flaky, the fat from the sausages creating pockets of rich, meaty flavor. Some families brushed the tops with melted butter and sesame seeds before baking, adding extra richness and subtle, nutty crunch. In Black households during the 1970s, these sausage rolls appeared at every major holiday, their ease of preparation making them perfect for busy cooks managing multiple dishes. Children loved them because they were small, portable, and perfectly sized for little hands. Neck bone stew was the kind of meal that held an entire household together when the cold crept in and the money ran out faster than anyone wanted to admit. Neck bones were cheap, sometimes only a few cents, but they carried enough flavor to build a whole pot of warmth around them. If you knew what you were doing, mothers and grandmothers would rinse them clean, drop them into a big pot of water, and let them simmer for hours until the kitchen filled with a slow, steady steam that made the windows fog up. Onions, celery, salt, pepper, and maybe a bay leaf. If the house had one left, all of it went in to stretch the bones into something that tasted rich and full. Even though the ingredients were simple, kids would hover near the stove, claiming they were cold, but really just waiting for that moment when the meat softened enough to fall from the bone with no effort. Rice or potatoes always went on the side because that was how you made a meal last. And nobody ever complained because the stew soaked into everything it touched. It was not fancy and it did not pretend to be, but it kept bellies warm during winters that felt too long and too hard. Neck bone stew tasted like survival, like patience, like the kind of care that did not need big speeches. It was a winter meal that carried whole families through nights when the house felt drafty and the bills piled high, and even today people remember it with a quiet kind of gratitude. Neckbone stew transformed discarded cuts into Sunday dinner centerpieces that fed entire families from parts that cost almost nothing. Pork neck bones were slow-simmered for hours with onions, garlic, celery, potatoes, and carrots until the meat fell off the bones into rich broth. The long cooking extracted every bit of flavor and marrow, creating liquid that tasted like patience and love combined. Families served this over rice or with cornbread to soak up every precious drop. In the 1970s, neck bones were rejected by white butchers, making them perfect for black families stretching tight budgets. Children grew up knowing that Sunday meant neck bone stew, that familiar aroma announcing something special was coming. The dish represented ultimate transformation, turning what others rejected into family tradition and genuine nourishment. This wasn't just food, but cultural preservation, showing how resourcefulness created meals that sustained both body and spirit through generations of hardship and celebration, combined into single pots. Canned peach cobbler was Christmas sweetness made easy. When fresh fruit was too expensive, mothers reached for those syrupy cans that glistened like sunshine. They poured the peaches into a baking dish, mixed sugar, flour, and a bit of cinnamon, then spooned biscuit dough right on top. As it baked, the syrup bubbled up around the edges, caramelizing into something golden and sticky. The whole house filled with the scent of fruit and butter and celebration. Served warm with a dollop of cream. If you had it, it tasted like summer remembered in the middle of winter. Even the simplest ingredients could turn into something unforgettable when stirred by love. Canned cobbler became the star of Christmas night, passed around between cousins with laughter and chatter, eaten straight from the pan when plates ran short. It wasn't about perfection. It was about joy, shared and steaming, one sweet spoonful at a time. Collard greens cooked with smoked turkey tails instead of ham hocks provided the traditional side dish at a fraction of the cost, turning a bag of greens into nourishment that carried flavor and cultural meaning. Turkey tails, often overlooked and heavily discounted at butcher counters, contained enough fat and smokiness to season an entire pot for under $2. Black mothers would buy 3 or 4 pounds of fresh collards from produce stands where vegetables stayed affordable. The greens were washed repeatedly until no grit remained, then chopped and added to pots where turkey tails had been simmering with onions and vinegar. Hours of slow cooking broke down the greens until they turned silky, while potlikker became broth so flavorful that people sipped it from cups. This wasn't just a side dish, but vitamin-rich vegetables that provided essential nutrients. Families served collards alongside everything else, understanding that greens represented prosperity. Cheese ball rolled in pecans sat proudly on serving platters surrounded by crackers, its cream cheese base mixed with cheddar, green onions, and seasonings before being shaped into a perfect sphere and coated with chopped pecans. Aunties would soften cream cheese and mix it with shredded sharp cheddar, finely chopped green onions, Worcestershire sauce, garlic powder, and sometimes hot sauce for complexity. The mixture was then shaped into a ball or log, wrapped in plastic, and chilled until firm enough to handle. Just before serving, the cheese ball was rolled in finely chopped pecans that created a crunchy, nutty coating contrasting beautifully with the creamy interior. In 1970s Black households, cheese balls represented sophistication and effort, centerpieces of appetizer spreads that showed guests the host had put thought into the gathering. Children loved them because they could spread the cheese themselves onto crackers, feeling grown up and independent. Butter beans with ham hocks stretched single pieces of smoked pork into meals feeding entire families for 2 days with minimal additional ingredients. Large dried lima beans were soaked overnight, then simmered for hours with ham hocks, onions, garlic, and black pepper until creamy and rich throughout. The ham hocks released their smoky flavor and gelatinous richness into the cooking liquid, creating thick, savory broth that coated each bean perfectly every time. This combination provided protein from both beans and meat, making it nutritionally complete even though ham hocks were among the cheapest cuts available anywhere. The beans were served over rice or with cornbread, with the potlikker considered precious enough to sip from bowls like soup. In the 1970s, dried beans were pantry staples lasting months and costing less than $1 per pound for family supplies. A single ham hock could flavor an entire pot of beans, making the meat-to-meal ratio incredibly economical for struggling families. Macaroni and cheese baked in a cast-iron pan was a dish that never needed a reason to appear, but at Christmas, it was a promise fulfilled. Mothers mixed elbow macaroni with canned evaporated milk, margarine, and chunks of processed cheese, turning bare shelves into comfort. That cast-iron pan gave it soul. The edges browned just right, crispy and bubbling, the center soft and rich. It wasn't fancy cheese or gourmet technique. It was love measured in scoops. Kids hovered around the oven, waiting for that first golden crust to crack. It was creamy, cheesy, and filling enough to stretch one pan between a dozen hungry hearts. Each bite carried the warmth of care, the kind of meal that said, "You're home." It was never just a side dish. It was a centerpiece, a symbol of plenty made from very little. No holiday spread felt whole without it. Potato salad stretched with extra eggs and mayonnaise became the cold side dish that fed crowds for minimal cost, transforming basic potatoes into creamy satisfaction. Black mothers boiled potatoes by the 5-pound bag, timing them carefully so they'd be firm enough to dice without turning to mush, then combined them with hard-boiled eggs that provided protein. The ratio was crucial. Enough eggs to make the salad filling, but not so many that it tasted only of eggs, with mayonnaise binding everything together. Mustard added tang, while finely diced celery and onions provided crunch and flavor dimension. The true economical genius came from using potatoes as filler, allowing a single dozen eggs to feed 20 people when stretched with enough starch. Some families added sweet pickle relish for both flavor and the satisfaction of having extras in their salad. The salad chilled overnight, making it perfect for gatherings where oven space was limited and make-ahead dishes were essential. Fried chicken livers with hot sauce delivered iron-rich organ meat in forms that even children would eat, especially when coated in seasoned flour and fried crispy golden brown. The livers were soaked in buttermilk to remove any bitterness, dredged in flour mixed with paprika, garlic powder, and cayenne, then fried quickly in hot oil until perfectly cooked. The result was crispy outside with creamy, almost mousse-like interior that melted in the mouth when cooked properly without overcooking into grainy texture. These provided concentrated nutrition, including iron, B vitamins, and protein in affordable packages costing less than $1 per pound at markets. Families served them as main dishes or snacks, with hot sauce being mandatory for many who loved the spicy, rich combination that made them addictive. In the 1970s, chicken livers were considered poor people's food that wealthier families avoided completely, meaning they stayed affordable and accessible for struggling families. Fried chicken livers represented nutritional wisdom disguised as soul food, proving that the cheapest cuts often delivered the most essential nutrients. Mustard greens mixed with turnip tops were the thriftier cousin of collards, but they carried just as much soul. These greens came from gardens and neighbors' hands, bundled together with love and gratitude. Black mothers washed them in cold water again and again, getting rid of grit before tossing them in the pot. They simmered low and slow with salt pork or a leftover ham bone, transforming bitterness into something bold and delicious. Mustard greens had a sharp bite, turnip tops added earthiness, and together they made a dish that tasted like home. The broth, called potlikker, was liquid gold, sopped up with cornbread until not a drop remained. This wasn't just food, it was a shared ritual, one that stretched across generations. Families gathered around the table, the steam rising from bowls, laughter mixing with the smell of smoky greens. It was nourishment for body and soul, served with pride and memory. Cream cheese and olive pinwheels, made with softened cream cheese mixed with chopped green olives and rolled in tortillas, created tangy, savory bites. Children found intriguing. Aunties would soften cream cheese and mix it with finely chopped green olives, pimentos, and sometimes a touch of garlic powder, spreading the mixture evenly on flour tortillas. The tortillas were rolled tightly, wrapped in plastic, and refrigerated for hours to firm up before being sliced into colorful pinwheels. Each slice revealed swirls of white cream cheese dotted with green olive pieces, creating visual appeal that drew children's attention. In 1970s, Black households, these pinwheels represented creative entertaining, showing how simple ingredients could become elegant appetizers. Children loved them because they were fun to look at, easy to eat, and introduced them to olives in a creamy format that made the vegetables more approachable and less intimidating than eating them whole. Cornmeal rolls made when wheat flour ran short provided the golden, slightly sweet bread that soaked up gravy while stretching limited baking supplies into enough bread for everyone. Black mothers would combine cornmeal with whatever wheat flour remained, creating hybrid rolls that had distinctive texture and flavor, unlike purely wheat-based versions. The cornmeal added slight grittiness and natural sweetness that children found appealing, while the golden color made them look more special than plain white rolls. These rolls required less kneading than traditional bread, making them accessible to cooks with limited time or experience. A single batch using mostly cornmeal could feed 20 people, while using only a fraction of the expensive wheat flour that pure rolls would require. The rolls were best served warm when their texture was softest, though they also held up well for next-day turkey sandwiches. Shrimp cocktail served in small cups with tangy cocktail sauce was elegant finger food that made children feel sophisticated. The cold, tender shrimp dipped in spicy sweet sauce, creating flavors that seemed fancy. Mothers would boil shrimp in seasoned water with Old Bay seasoning, lemon, and bay leaves until they turned pink and curled, then plunge them into ice water to stop the cooking. Once chilled, the shrimp were peeled and deveined, their tails left on for easy handling, then arranged around small cups filled with cocktail sauce made from ketchup, horseradish, lemon juice, and Worcestershire sauce. The cocktail sauce had a sharp, tangy kick that balanced the shrimp's natural sweetness, creating combinations that felt restaurant quality. In the 1970s, Black households, shrimp cocktail represented luxury and celebration, an appetizer that elevated holiday gatherings. Children loved shrimp cocktail because they could hold the shrimp by the tail and dip them like French fries. Chicken backs and rice were one of the most practical winter meals mothers relied on when the prices of better cuts climbed too high to touch. Chicken backs were cheap, sometimes the only poultry a family could afford, but they carried enough meat and flavor to build an entire pot around. Mothers simmered them with onions and seasoning until the bones loosened and the broth turned golden. Then came the rice, poured in generously because rice made everything stretch. Kids would watch the pot grow fuller and fuller as the grains absorbed the broth. The chicken pieces were small, but the flavor was big enough to make the whole meal feel complete. It was warm, filling, and steady, the kind of dish that felt like a blessing when the weather outside refused to let up. Chicken backs and rice were proof that a mother could take almost nothing and turn it into enough. It was winter courage served in a bowl. Mustard greens with ham hocks delivered bitter, peppery flavors that balanced the smoky pork perfectly while providing vitamins and minerals essential for health and sustained well-being. The greens were cleaned thoroughly, then cooked low and slow with ham hocks, onions, vinegar, and hot sauce until tender, but still maintaining some texture throughout. The bitterness mellowed during cooking, balanced by the pork's saltiness and the vinegar's tang, creating complex flavors that developed over hours of patient simmering. The potlikker was considered especially valuable, packed with vitamins leached from the greens and rich with pork flavor worth savoring. Families served this with cornbread and hot sauce, with children learning to appreciate the bitter notes that many initially resisted eating. In the 1970s, mustard greens grew easily in southern gardens and could be purchased cheaply at markets when homegrown weren't available for picking. Mustard greens with ham hocks represented southern cooking wisdom, showing how proper preparation made even bitter vegetables into food people actually wanted to eat. Okra and tomato stew brought the flavor of summer to winter tables, a dish that carried sunshine in every spoonful. Okra, sliced thin and simmered with canned tomatoes, onions, and a sprinkle of salt, made a stew that was thick, tangy, and alive with color. It was born from gardens, of careful hands picking okra in August, of jars filled and stored with care for the cold months ahead. Black mothers stirred it slow, letting it bubble until the okra softened into silk and the tomatoes broke down into a rich red sauce. Served over rice or eaten with cornbread, it was both filling and beautiful, the colors of the dish reflecting the joy of the season. The bright red against green looked like Christmas itself, shining even on the humblest tables. Each bite was a taste of family, of summer's labor and winter's gratitude blending perfectly. The stew didn't just warm stomachs, it warmed memories. It reminded families that even when times were lean, the earth had given enough, and the work of their own hands could bring richness that no store could sell. Black-eyed peas cooked with onions and bacon fat carried both flavor and cultural significance, representing good fortune traditions that connected families to their southern roots and African heritage. Black mothers prepared black-eyed peas for Thanksgiving as practice for New Year's Day when they'd serve them for luck, creating consistency in holiday cooking that children recognized and anticipated. The peas themselves cost less than beans, making them even more economical, and they cooked faster while still providing complete protein when served alongside cornbread or rice. Bacon fat, saved throughout the year, seasoned the peas with smoky richness, while onions added sweetness and depth that made even simple preparations taste complex. Some families added tomatoes or peppers when available, but the core remained peas, onions, and pork fat simmered until tender. Children grew up associating black-eyed peas with celebration and family, understanding that these humble legumes carried meaning beyond mere nutrition. Pimento cheese pinwheels made with tortillas spread with creamy pimento cheese and rolled into tight spirals created colorful, easy-to-eat bites that children grabbed enthusiastically. Aunties would spread flour tortillas with homemade pimento cheese made from sharp cheddar, cream cheese, diced pimentos, mayonnaise, and seasonings. The tortillas were then rolled tightly into logs, wrapped in plastic wrap, and refrigerated for several hours to firm up and make slicing easier. Once chilled, the logs were unwrapped and sliced into rounds about half an inch thick, each pinwheel revealing the bright orange cheese dotted with red pimento pieces. In 1970s, Black households' pimento cheese pinwheels represented modern entertaining, a variation on traditional pimento cheese that made serving easier and more elegant. Children loved pimento cheese pinwheels because they were perfectly portioned, colorful, and tasted like their favorite spread in a fun new format. Stewed rutabagas and carrots were a winter staple built from vegetables that could survive long stretches in the pantry without spoiling. These root vegetables were cheap, often overlooked, but they carried a sweetness that only deepened when cooked low and slow. Mothers peeled them, chopped them into thick chunks, and let them simmer in a pot with onions, salt, pepper, and a little fat if the house had any left. As they cooked, the rutabagas softened into something buttery, while the carrots released their natural sugar into the broth. The smell was earthy and comforting, a reminder that winter food did not have to be complicated to be satisfying. Kids sometimes wrinkled their noses at rutabagas, but by the time the pot was ready, they were scooping out big spoonfuls without a second thought. The stew filled the stomach in a steady, grounding way, offering warmth that lasted long after the bowl was empty. Served alone or with cornbread, it could stretch into multiple meals, each one tasting richer than the last, Stewed rutabagas and carrots were a reminder that survival did not always look glamorous, but it always tasted like perseverance and care. Fried pork chops smothered in gravy turned inexpensive bone-in chops into Sunday dinner centerpieces that made families feel like they were eating something truly special and celebratory. The chops were seasoned generously with salt, pepper, garlic powder, and paprika, dredged in flour, then fried in hot oil until golden brown and crispy all over. After removing the chops, the same skillet was used to make gravy from the drippings, flour, and milk, creating rich sauce poured over the meat. The chops were returned to the gravy and simmered until tender, with the sauce soaking into the crispy coating beautifully. Served with rice, mashed potatoes, or grits, this became meals that satisfied on multiple levels at once. In the 1970s, bone-in pork chops were affordable protein, especially when purchased in bulk from local butchers who knew their customers personally and offered deals. Children eagerly anticipated smothered pork chops, knowing they meant something special was happening that deserved celebration. Homemade yeast rolls were the quiet showstopper of every Christmas dinner table, the kind of bread that didn't just sit beside the main dishes, it completed them. Black mothers in the 1970s made them from scratch, often starting before the sun came up. Flour, yeast, sugar, and warm water, simple, humble things that came together with magic and patience. The dough would rise under a clean towel on the counter, doubling in size like a promise. Then came the kneading, the folding, the careful rolling into perfect rounds brushed with melted butter. When those rolls hit the oven, the smell could make anyone forget their troubles. Golden and pillowy, they tore apart in steamy wisps that melted on the tongue. You could eat them plain, with syrup, or smothered in gravy. They never disappointed. Mothers often baked extra, knowing the next morning's breakfast would be nothing but leftover rolls and coffee. They were small reminders that comfort didn't come from money. It came from time, love, and flour-dusted hands that never stopped working. Even when the table was simple, those rolls made it feel like a feast fit for kings. Pinto beans, slow-cooked with ham bone scraps, provided protein-rich side dishes that cost almost nothing, yet fed crowds with stick-to-your-ribs satisfaction. Black mothers would soak dried beans overnight, then simmer them all day with ham bones scavenged from previous meals, creating broth that was rich with smoky, meaty flavor. The beans themselves cost less than 50 cents for a 2-pound bag that swelled to feed 20 people when cooked with onions, garlic, and bay leaves. This wasn't quick cooking, but all-day simmering that transformed hard-dried beans into creamy, tender morsels swimming in thick, flavorful liquid. Some women added a pinch of sugar to balance saltiness, while others let the ham bone provide all seasoning needed. Children might have initially resisted beans, but when served alongside cornbread for sopping up potlikker, even picky eaters cleaned their plates. Pinto beans represented economic wisdom passed down through generations. Crab cakes formed into mini patties were seafood luxury that made Thanksgiving feel extra special. The sweet crab meat mixed with breadcrumbs and seasonings before being pan-fried until golden. Grandmothers would pick through cans of crab meat to remove any shell pieces, then gently fold the delicate meat with beaten eggs, breadcrumbs, mayonnaise, mustard, Old Bay seasoning, and sometimes diced bell peppers. The mixture was formed into small patties, each one handled carefully, then refrigerated briefly to help them hold together during cooking. The crab cakes were pan-fried in butter until golden brown on both sides, the exterior developing a crispy crust while the interior stayed moist and packed with sweet crab flavor. In the 1970s, Black households, crab cakes represented coastal sophistication, bringing seafood traditions to holiday tables and elevating the appetizer spread. Children loved mini crab cakes because they felt fancy, tasted sweet rather than fishy, and came in sizes perfect for young appetites. Salt pork and cabbage soup was a meal built for hard weather and harder weeks, the kind that stretched calories when the fridge was nearly empty. Salt pork added just enough fat and flavor to turn cabbage and water into something that tasted like a real meal. Mothers chopped the cabbage, let it wilt in a pot with onions, then dropped in a small piece of salt pork that seasoned everything as it simmered. The broth turned savory and warm, filling the kitchen with a smell that made kids feel like dinner would be enough after all. Cabbage softened into silky ribbons that soaked up every bit of flavor, and no one ever complained about the simplicity because it tasted good and filled the stomach. It was cheap, reliable, and the kind of soup that made you forget for a moment how thin the grocery budget had become. Salt pork and cabbage soup tasted like winter resilience in a bowl. Pig ears, boiled then fried, transformed another discarded cut into crispy, gelatinous treats that appeared at gatherings and celebrations throughout Black communities nationwide during warm months. The ears were thoroughly cleaned, boiled until tender, then sliced into strips, breaded, and deep-fried until golden and crispy on the outside with satisfying crunch. The texture was unique, with crispy breading giving way to tender cartilage that had a satisfying chew unlike any other food available anywhere. These weren't everyday food, but special treats that showed up at fish fries, family reunions, and summer cookouts where people gathered to celebrate. The ears provided collagen and minerals while costing almost nothing per pound, since most butchers were happy to sell what they couldn't move otherwise to anyone. In the 1970s, pig ears represented nose-to-tail eating decades before it became fashionable in upscale restaurants charging premium prices. The preparation required skill and patience, with experienced cooks knowing exactly how long to boil and at what temperature to fry perfectly. Candied yams with marshmallows were joy baked in a casserole dish. The yams were boiled until soft, mashed with brown sugar, butter, and a hint of vanilla, then topped with white marshmallows that toasted golden under the oven's heat. The sweetness was almost sinful, but no Christmas table felt complete without it. The smell of caramelized sugar and melting butter drew everyone to the table. It was the dish kids remembered most, a bright, sugary memory that never faded. Candied yams weren't about extravagance. They were about making celebration from simplicity. Every bite was sunshine, nostalgia, and love rolled into one. Mothers made them with a kind of reverence, knowing this dish brought light to even the leanest holidays. The bubbling syrup coated every piece, and the top browned just enough to crackle when you scooped it. Sometimes families would add crushed pineapple or a drizzle of molasses for extra sweetness. Whatever went in, the result was always the same: pure, joyful comfort. Those yams weren't just dessert, they were a promise that even in hard times, something sweet could still find its way to the table. Dinner rolls made from scratch using leftover mashed potatoes became the soft, pillowy bread that absorbed gravy and made meals feel complete without buying expensive bakery items. Black mothers discovered that adding mashed potatoes to bread dough created rolls with incredible softness and moisture that stayed fresh for days, perfect for holiday meals where food needed to last. A single potato combined with flour, yeast, and minimal butter produced dozens of rolls that cost pennies compared to store-bought options. The dough was easy to work with, forgiving for inexperienced bakers, and could be shaped into various sizes depending on how many people needed feeding. Children loved pulling apart warm rolls to watch the steam escape, while adults appreciated how the potato rolls stayed soft even when served hours after baking. These rolls represented kitchen wisdom that turned leftovers and scraps into something families actively requested. Fried okra rounds served with ranch dressing were crispy, crunchy appetizers that introduced children to vegetables in ways that made them forget they were eating something healthy, the golden coating making every bite feel like a treat. Mothers would slice fresh okra into thick rounds, coating them first in buttermilk that helped breading adhere, then dredging them in seasoned cornmeal mixed with flour, salt, pepper, and garlic powder. The okra rounds were dropped into hot oil where they bubbled and crisped, the cornmeal coating turning golden brown while the okra inside stayed tender. Once drained on paper towels and sprinkled with extra salt while still hot, the okra was piled into serving bowls and placed near small dishes of ranch dressing that children dunked them into with enthusiasm. In Black households during the 1970s, fried okra represented Southern tradition meeting holiday hospitality. Children loved fried okra because it felt like eating fried chicken in vegetable form. Peanut butter biscuits were the kind of winter comfort food that made up for the nights when meat was impossible to afford and the pantry looked emptier than anyone wanted to say out loud. Peanut butter was cheap, full of protein, and stretched a long way. so mothers mixed it into biscuit dough to make something heavier, richer, and more filling than a regular biscuit could ever be. The dough came together quickly, soft and slightly sticky, and once it hit the oven, the whole house filled with a smell that felt like a blanket wrapped around your shoulders. Kids waited for them to come out hot and golden, hoping to be the first to split one open and watch the steam rise. Sometimes syrup went on top, sometimes jelly, sometimes just a pat of butter if there was any left. No matter how they were served, the biscuits were warm, thick, and comforting in a way that made you forget for a moment how tight things were. Each bite had that nutty flavor that stuck to the top of your mouth just long enough to make you smile. They were cheap, reliable, and exactly the kind of food that kept families going through long winters when the cold pressed in from every wall. Peanut butter biscuits tasted like care made visible. Red beans and rice became Monday tradition, using Sunday's leftover ham bone to create entirely new meals that cost almost nothing but fed families for days. Dried red beans were soaked overnight, then simmered all day with the ham bone, onions, celery, bell peppers, and Creole seasonings until creamy and thick. The long cooking broke down the bean starches, creating natural gravy that coated white rice perfectly while providing complete protein. Mothers could start the pot in the morning and let it simmer while doing laundry, making it perfectly practical for busy days filled with household responsibilities. The dish improved with time, tasting even better the second day when flavors had fully melded together completely. In the 1970s, dried beans cost pennies and lasted months in pantries, making them reliable staples for tight budgets. Red beans and rice showed how yesterday's scraps became today's sustenance, with nothing wasted and everyone fed satisfyingly. Collard greens with smoked turkey necks were the heartbeat of Christmas dinner, a pot of patience simmering slow and steady on the stove. When ham hocks were too expensive, turkey necks stepped in, cheap, smoky, and full of soul. The greens were washed again and again, stripped of stems, and piled high into the biggest pot in the kitchen. They'd cook down until tender, swimming in a broth that smelled like home. That potlikker, as elders called it, held every ounce of flavor, rich enough to dip cornbread in. Children would wander by, asking if the greens were ready yet, and mothers would smile, stirring slow with a wooden spoon. These greens carried the stories of generations, of making do and making it good. The turkey necks gave up their meat, melting into the mix until every bite held a taste of smoke and salt and care. By the time dinner was served, the air was thick with warmth, laughter, and gratitude. Cranberry sauce, made from whole berries and sugar water, provided the traditional tart-sweet condiment without spending money on canned versions that cost 3 times more. Black mothers would buy fresh cranberries when they appeared seasonally in grocery stores, usually paying less than $1 for a pound that made enough sauce for 20 people. The berries were simmered with sugar and water until they burst and thickened into glossy, ruby-red sauce that tasted fresher and brighter than anything from cans. Some women added orange zest when citrus was affordable, while others kept it simple with just berries, sugar, and patience. The sauce could be made days ahead and actually improved with time as flavors melded, making it perfect for busy Thanksgiving preparations. Children loved the sweet tart flavor that contrasted with rich, savory dishes, while adults appreciated the burst of color and acidity that balanced heavy meals. Smoked oysters on crackers with hot sauce were adventurous bites that curious children tried. The smoky, briny oysters creating complex flavors that divided people into lovers and haters with no middle ground. Fathers would open tins of smoked oysters packed in oil, arranging them on serving platters surrounded by crackers and providing small bottles of hot sauce for those who wanted extra heat. The oysters had a strong, distinctive flavor, smoky from the curing process and intensely oceanic. Each oyster was placed on a cracker, sometimes with a tiny drop of hot sauce, creating bite-sized portions that delivered maximum flavor. In 1970s, Black household smoked oysters represented coastal sophistication and culinary bravery, appetizers that showed guests the host was willing to serve bold, distinctive foods. Children who tried smoked oysters either loved them immediately or swore them off forever, the strong flavor creating lasting memories. Sweet potato hash was one of those winter meals that carried families through the longest, coldest evenings when the house felt drafty and the money was already gone. Sweet potatoes lasted for months if you stored them right, tucked into a cool corner where they held on, even when everything else spoiled. Mothers peeled them, chopped them into thick cubes, and tossed them into a skillet with onions sizzling in a little oil. The smell was deep and earthy, the kind of scent that settled low in the air and made kids drift into the kitchen to see if dinner was almost ready. As the potatoes softened and browned, the onions melted into them, giving every bite a sweetness mixed with a little sharpness that warmed you from the inside out. Kids loved scraping the crispy bits from the bottom of the pan, the ones that tasted smoky and rich like they had been cooked just for them. It was a full skillet meal that cost nearly nothing, but felt like something made with intention and care. Sweet potato hash was a dish that held families steady during hard winters, reminding everyone that simple food could still be comforting, filling, and memorable. It was warmth you could taste, survival you could savor, and one more example of how Black households in the 1970s turned everyday ingredients into lifelines. Lima beans with ham and tomatoes created summer dishes that combined fresh vegetables with smoked pork in ways that made even vegetable-hating children clean their plates completely. Fresh or frozen lima beans were simmered with ham pieces, tomatoes, onions, and peppers until the beans were creamy and the tomatoes had broken down into sauce coating everything. The acidity from tomatoes balanced the beans' starchiness, while the ham added smokiness and salt that brought all flavors together into cohesive whole. This one-pot meal required minimal supervision once assembled, making it perfect for hot summer days when standing over stoves felt absolutely unbearable. The dish was nutritious and filling, providing protein, fiber, and vitamins all in one bowl served over rice for complete meals. In the 1970s, lima beans were garden staples that families grew themselves or purchased frozen in bulk economically at stores. Lima beans with ham and tomatoes represented seasonal cooking and the satisfaction of eating fresh produce prepared simply but deliciously. Fried cabbage with salt pork was simplicity turned to splendor. A head of cabbage, a few slices of pork, and a sprinkle of pepper were all it took to fill the kitchen with the smell of home. The pork would sizzle first, rendering fat that kissed every strand of cabbage in smoky flavor. It wilted down into something tender, rich, and savory, the kind of food that hugged you from the inside out. Poor families called it a side dish, but it was often the main course, served with cornbread or rice. It was humble, hearty, and always delicious. Fried cabbage wasn't just food. It was a memory you could taste, a reminder that even the simplest ingredients could shine when seasoned with love. Macaroni and cheese made from scratch with government cheese became the creamy casserole that turned welfare assistance into something families served with pride. Government commodity cheese, distributed through assistance programs, came in large blocks that creative mothers transformed into dishes that tasted better than store-bought. The cheese had unique texture and sharp flavor that melted beautifully when combined with evaporated milk, eggs, and elbow macaroni bought in bulk. Women layered the mixture in large baking dishes, topping it with extra cheese and sometimes breadcrumbs, then baked until golden and bubbling. The result was dense, creamy mac and cheese that could feed 20 people with just 2 boxes of pasta and 1 block of government cheese. Children loved it because the cheese pulled into strings with each serving. This wasn't bland, watery mac and cheese from boxes, but rich custard-like casserole that required skill to perfect. Black mothers took pride in their mac and cheese recipes. Cheese straws made from sharp cheddar and cayenne pepper were crispy, addictive sticks that disappeared from serving bowls almost as quickly as they were refilled, their orange-gold color and spicy kick making them irresistible. Grandmothers would grate blocks of sharp cheddar by hand, mixing it with softened butter, flour, cayenne pepper, and salt until the dough came together, then pressing it through cookie presses or rolling it into long ropes before slicing. The cheese straws baked until crispy and slightly browned at the edges, filling kitchens with the sharp, tangy aroma of melting cheese mixed with subtle heat. Once cooled, they were stored in tins, maintaining crispness for days. In 1970s, Black households, cheese straws represented Southern tradition, recipes passed down through generations with each family adding their signature touch. extra cayenne, paprika, or pecans. Collard greens with hog jowl were one of the most reliable winter foods Black families turned to when the cold settled deep and the fridge looked emptier than anyone wanted to admit. Hog jowl was cheap, far cheaper than most other cuts, but it added a smoky richness that turned greens into something powerful. The pot simmered for hours, filling the house with a slow, rising warmth that made you forget how cold it was outside. Kids grew up on this smell, associating it with safety, hunger, and comfort all at once. The greens softened as they cooked, soaking up every bit of flavor the hog jowl released. Served with rice or cornbread, they became a full winter meal that did not need anything else. It tasted like tradition, like resourcefulness, like the kind of food made by people who knew how to survive anything. Collard greens with hog jowl were not just nourishment, they were a lesson passed down one pot at a time. Pickled pig's feet were treasured treats appearing at celebrations and family gatherings whenever someone wanted to honor Southern traditions and ancestral heritage. Fresh pig's feet were thoroughly cleaned, boiled until tender, then packed into jars with hot spiced vinegar, onions, bay leaves, and peppercorns for long preservation. After weeks of curing, the feet developed complex, tangy flavors, while the vinegar turned the meat silky and gelatinous with unique texture. They were eaten cold, straight from jars, with bones pulled clean and every bit of meat and skin consumed without waste. The gelatinous texture was considered especially nourishing, believed to be good for joints and overall health when consumed regularly. In the 1970s, pig's feet cost almost nothing because most Americans avoided them completely, making them perfect for Black families honoring traditional foodways passed down through generations. The preparation required skill and patience, with experienced cooks knowing exactly how long to boil and which spices created perfect balance. Cornbread dressing with giblets was proof that nothing in a Black mother's kitchen ever went to waste. Leftover cornbread became the soul of the dish, crumbled, seasoned, and mixed with onions, celery, and a broth made from the chicken or turkey itself. Giblets, once tossed aside by others, were chopped and stirred in for richness. The smell alone could make you stop mid-conversation, earthy and herby, with sage and butter filling the air. Every household had its version, some soft like pudding, others crisp on the edges from the oven's heat. It was a dish that stretched ingredients and stretched hearts, feeding a crowd on a small budget. Mothers made it with one hand stirring the pot and the other wiping a child's face, knowing that love didn't need wealth, it needed wisdom. Cornbread dressing tasted like abundance born out of frugality, like the magic of turning little into plenty. It wasn't just food, it was history baked golden in a pan. Cornbread dressing, made from dried-out bread and day-old cornbread, turned stale leftovers into the savory stuffing that anchored Thanksgiving plates throughout Black communities. Mothers saved bread ends, biscuit pieces, and cornbread scraps in bags for weeks before the holiday, letting them air dry until rock hard so they'd absorb maximum liquid without turning mushy. On Thanksgiving morning, those saved breads would be crumbled and mixed with sautéed celery, onions, and sage, then moistened with chicken broth made from boiling backs and necks. Some women added finely chopped giblets, while others relied purely on vegetables and herbs for flavor. The dressing had to be moist enough to hold together but dry enough to crisp on top when baked. This wasn't bread cubes from expensive store-bought loaves, but carefully accumulated scraps transformed through skill. The golden brown top provided textural contrast to soft interior. For Black families, cornbread dressing represented resourcefulness, elevated to tradition. Chicken salad stuffed in cherry tomatoes created colorful, bite-sized portions that children eagerly grabbed. The cool, creamy chicken salad contrasting with the fresh, slightly tart tomato cups that held everything together. Aunties would hollow out cherry tomatoes using small spoons or melon ballers, creating little edible bowls that were functional and beautiful when arranged on serving platters. The chicken salad was made from finely chopped cooked chicken mixed with mayonnaise, diced celery, sweet pickle relish, and seasonings. The mixture kept cold until serving time. Each hollowed tomato was filled with a generous spoonful of chicken salad, mounded slightly on top for visual appeal. In 1970s Black households, these stuffed tomatoes represented creativity and presentation. transforming simple ingredients into appetizers that looked impressive enough for special occasions. Children loved them because they were perfectly portioned, colorful, and combined familiar flavors in a fun format. Butter beans with smoked turkey tails were a pot that made the entire house smell like the best kind of winter comfort. Turkey tails were cheap, often overlooked, but they released enough fat and smoke to transform butter beans into something rich and satisfying. Mothers simmered the beans slowly, letting the turkey tails soften and break apart as the pot cooked. The beans absorbed the flavor, turning creamy and thick. Kids knew the smell long before they heard the call for dinner, drifting toward the kitchen with bowls already in hand. The meal was hearty, filling, and stretched across multiple days when money needed to go further. Served with rice or cornbread, it became a winter staple. Butter beans with turkey tails tasted like thrift, turned into abundance. Oxtail stew transformed the tail of cattle into fall-off-the-bone tender meat swimming in rich, gelatinous gravy that coated everything perfectly when served over white rice. The oxtails were browned first to develop deep flavor, then slowly braised with onions, carrots, celery, tomatoes, and red wine or broth for hours until the meat became incredibly tender and rich. The bones released collagen and marrow, thickening the sauce naturally and creating richness that couldn't be achieved any other way with cheaper ingredients. This wasn't quick food, but patient food, requiring hours of low heat to transform tough connective tissue into silky texture worth waiting for. Families served this on special occasions despite the humble ingredient because the preparation demanded time and attention that showed love clearly. In the 1970s, oxtails were considered throwaway cuts that butchers sold cheaply, perfect for Black families who understood their potential for transformation into something special. The dish represented culinary alchemy, showing how time, technique, and patience could transform the least desirable cuts. Fried catfish with cornmeal crust was Christmas Eve's tradition for many families, a taste of the South that brought joy before the big holiday meal. The fish was dredged in seasoned cornmeal, then fried until golden and crisp, the smell filling every corner of the house. It was cheap to make, but tasted like luxury, flaky on the inside, crunchy on the outside. Some families caught the fish themselves. Others bought it fresh from the market, wrapping it carefully in newspaper for the journey home. Served with tartar sauce, coleslaw, or hot sauce, it was the kind of meal that pulled everyone to the table before you even called. The sizzle of catfish in oil was the sound of anticipation, of celebration on the horizon. Even after the feast, the memories lingered, the laughter, the stories, the golden crumbs left on plates. Fried catfish wasn't just food, it was a gathering, a reminder that blessings could be fried up right at home. Mothers took pride in their perfectly crisp fillets, testing the oil with a drop of water to make sure it hissed just right. The smell carried through the house, mingling with the sounds of gospel music or Motown on the radio. For families who had little, that pan of catfish felt like abundance itself, a meal that turned any evening into a celebration of love, flavor, and home. Sweet potato pie made from scratch with lard crust became the dessert that delivered holiday sweetness without requiring expensive ingredients, turning humble root vegetables into celebration. Black mothers baked their own sweet potatoes until soft, then mashed them with evaporated milk, eggs, sugar, and warm spices like cinnamon, nutmeg, and vanilla when affordable. The filling was rich, smooth, and naturally sweet, requiring less added sugar than other desserts, making it economical and delicious. Pie crusts made with lard rather than butter saved money while producing flaky, tender pastry. Some women topped their pies with meringue made from leftover egg whites, creating impressive height without additional cost, while others left them plain. A single pie cost less than $2 in ingredients, yet could be sliced into 12 portions, making it far more economical than cakes. The pies were often baked the day before Thanksgiving. Chicken liver pâté spread on crackers created rich, smooth bites that adventurous children tried, the creamy texture and distinctive flavor introducing them to foods that felt grown-up and sophisticated. Aunties would sauté chicken livers with onions and butter until cooked through but still slightly pink inside, Then blend them with cream cheese, spices, and sometimes brandy or sherry until smooth. The pâté was chilled in molds or ramekins, then unmolded onto serving platters surrounded by crackers and garnished with chopped parsley or capers. The texture was silky smooth, while the flavor was rich and slightly metallic in that characteristic liver way that some loved and others found challenging. In Black households during the 1970s, chicken liver pâté represented culinary sophistication, recipes borrowed from French cuisine and adapted to Southern ingredients. Children who tried it felt brave and grown up, stepping outside their comfort zones to taste foods their parents enjoyed at special gatherings. Salmon croquettes stretched single cans into crispy patties, feeding 6 people for less than $1, proving that canned goods could become genuinely delicious meals. The salmon was drained, mashed with breadcrumbs, eggs, onions, and seasonings including black pepper, garlic powder, and hot sauce, then shaped into patties. These were fried in hot oil until golden brown and crispy outside while staying moist inside, providing omega-3 fatty acids and protein when fresh fish was completely unreachable. Mothers made them for dinner alongside macaroni and cheese or greens, creating meals that satisfied both hunger and budget constraints simultaneously. Children often requested these specifically, finding comfort in their familiar taste and satisfying crunch. In the 1970s, canned salmon was an affordable pantry staple that didn't require refrigeration, making it practical for families without reliable power. Salmon croquettes represented smart shopping meeting creative cooking, proving that thrift didn't mean sacrifice, just resourcefulness applied to available ingredients. Sweet potato pie with evaporated milk was the crown jewel of every holiday table, made not from luxury but from love and patience. Black mothers in the 1970s knew how to take what little they had and make it taste like a feast. Sweet potatoes were peeled, boiled, and mashed until smooth, then blended with canned evaporated milk, sugar, eggs, and just a whisper of cinnamon and nutmeg. That canned milk was a blessing. Cheap, rich, and shelf-stable, it gave the pie its creamy body when fresh milk was too costly. The scent of nutmeg and baked crust filled the house like warmth made visible, calling kids from every corner to peek at the oven window. These pies were more than dessert. They were tradition, made days in advance so flavors could deepen, often baked in mismatched pans that had seen decades of holidays. Mothers saved their best pie for Christmas Day, setting it proudly beside the tree, or wrapping it for church gatherings. The crust might have been store-bought, but the love was handmade. Every slice tasted like belonging, sweet and steady, with just enough spice to remind you where you came from. No one left the table hungry, and no one forgot that pie. Fried chicken wings bought in bulk became the affordable alternative to whole birds, giving families the crispy, golden poultry that made Thanksgiving feel festive without emptying wallets. Chicken wings sold for 30 cents per pound in the 1970s, making them one of the most economical cuts available, especially when purchased in 10-pound bags from discount grocers. Black mothers would season them overnight with paprika, garlic powder, onion powder, and black pepper, then fry them in batches until the skin shattered with each bite. The meat stayed juicy, while the coating turned crispy and flavorful, creating that perfect contrast that made fried chicken legendary in Black cooking traditions. Unlike turkey or whole chickens, wings fried quickly and could be prepared by multiple cooks simultaneously, making them practical for large gatherings. Children loved eating with their hands, while adults appreciated how wings stretched the poultry budget without sacrificing flavor. Cocktail meatballs simmered in grape jelly and chili sauce created sweet, savory bites that children couldn't resist, the glossy sauce coating each meatball like candy while delivering unexpected flavors. Mothers would brown frozen meatballs in skillets before transferring them to slow cookers or pots where they simmered in a mixture of grape jelly and bottled chili sauce that melted together into a thick, shiny glaze. The combination sounded strange but tasted magical, the grape jelly's sweetness balancing the chili sauce's tang and creating a flavor profile that kept people reaching for more. As the meatballs simmered, they absorbed the sauce and became tender, the exterior developing a sticky coating that made them perfect for spearing with toothpicks. In Black households during the 1970s, these cocktail meatballs represented easy elegance, a recipe that seemed fancy but required minimal effort. Children loved them because they were bite-sized, required no cutting, and tasted like a sweet, savory treat. Cornbread and potlikker was a winter lifeline, the kind of dish that carried a deeper history than most people realized. Potlikker was the broth left behind after cooking greens, and in many families it was considered just as valuable as the greens themselves. Thick, salty, and full of nutrients, it became a meal all on its own when paired with a slice of fresh cornbread. Mothers would crumble the cornbread into the potlikker or pour the broth directly over the bowl, letting it soak until the edges softened. Kids loved it more than they ever admitted, especially on nights when the cold felt sharp and the house needed something warming. It was simple food, but it tasted like something older, something that came from the days when nothing was wasted because nothing could be. Potlikker filled you up in a way that made your whole body feel steadier. Cornbread gave it something to cling to, turning a thin broth into a full meal. It was winter resilience in a bowl, humble but powerful. No matter how tight groceries got, this dish always came through. Caramel cake was the kind of reunion dessert that revealed who in the family had the patience and skill to stand over a hot stove, stirring icing long enough to make it perfect. The cake layers themselves were simple, tender and pale, but the icing was where the magic lived, thick, sweet, and slow cooked, until it deepened into a golden brown that tasted like butter, warmth, and memory. Grandmothers guarded their caramel icing method with pride because it took steady hands and a calm heart to keep the sugar from scorching as it bubbled and darkened in the pot. Once ready, the icing was poured over the stacked layers while still warm, spreading into silky drapes that coated every inch before cooling into a soft caramel shell. At reunions, the caramel cake always looked humble on the outside, but the moment it was sliced, people hurried forward for a piece because they knew the flavor inside carried generations of practice. The icing melted on the tongue with a sweetness that felt deep and comforting, and the cake beneath was tender enough to soak up every drop. Caramel cake tasted like real labor poured into something meant to be shared and celebrated. It reminded everyone that the best desserts came from time, attention, and love stirred slowly over a warm stove. Canned salmon croquettes were seafood turned comfort food, the kind of dish that turned a cheap pantry staple into something special. The salmon was mixed with breadcrumbs, chopped onions, egg, and seasoning, shaped into patties, and fried until golden brown. Crisp on the outside and tender within, they were often served with ketchup, mustard, or hot sauce, and sometimes a side of rice or grits. The smell alone made mouths water and gathered families in the kitchen. These croquettes were simple, quick, and deeply satisfying, a humble luxury during lean times. They made appearances at Christmas dinners and weekday suppers alike, proving good food didn't have to be costly. Mothers fried them carefully, turning each patty just once, ensuring the crust stayed perfect. Every bite carried comfort and care, a little piece of warmth from hands that knew how to stretch a can into a feast. These golden cakes were memories on a plate, crispy, savory, and made with love. Fried cabbage cooked with bacon ends became the vegetable side that tasted rich and satisfying despite costing almost nothing, transforming humble cruciferous vegetable into something people craved. Black mothers would shred cabbage from heads that cost less than 50 cents, then cook it slowly with bacon ends saved from breakfast preparations. The bacon fat and small meat pieces flavored the entire pot of cabbage, making it taste indulgent despite being mostly vegetable. Some women added onions for sweetness and complexity, while others kept it simple with just cabbage, bacon, and salt. The cabbage cooked down significantly, meaning one head could feed 8 to 10 people. Children who normally avoided vegetables would eat fried cabbage because it tasted bacony and rich. This dish represented the kind of flavor alchemy that Black cooks perfected through generations of making inexpensive ingredients taste expensive. Cabbage and smoked sausage skillet was the kind of dish that proved you could take almost nothing and turn it into something that fed a whole house without anyone feeling shortchanged. Cabbage was cheap, one of the cheapest vegetables in the store, and it filled a pot in a way almost nothing else could. Mothers would slice it thin, toss it into a skillet with a little oil, and stretch one single sausage link so far that every person at the table swore they got a piece. The smell of cabbage hitting the pan was unmistakable, sharp at first, but softening as it cooked down into something sweet and cozy. The sausage added just enough smoke to trick the mind into thinking the meal was richer than it really was. Kids would hover, waiting for the moment when the cabbage wilted just enough to match the shine of the sausage pieces. It was simple, hearty, and warm, and it filled bowls in a way that lasted through the night. In the winter, when money was tight and the weather felt unfriendly, this skillet kept people going. It tasted like thrift turned into comfort, like a mother's hands doing quiet miracles with whatever she had. It was everyday food that remembered its purpose well. Fried pork skin, also called cracklings, provided crunchy, salty snacks that satisfied cravings while using the pig's skin that would otherwise be completely discarded as useless waste. The skin was cut into strips, boiled briefly, then fried in its own rendered fat until it puffed up and turned crispy golden brown all over. The result was intensely porky, crunchy, and addictively salty, eaten by the handful like chips, but providing protein and fat that kept people satisfied longer. These appeared at gatherings, in paper bags at corner stores, and as homemade snacks when families butchered their own hogs for winter meat. The cracklings were also crumbled over greens, mixed into cornbread batter, or eaten alongside beans for added richness and satisfying texture throughout meals. In the 1970s, pork skin cost nearly nothing since most people threw it away without realizing its potential for transformation into snacks. Fried pork skin represented ultimate resourcefulness, finding value in what literally everyone else considered garbage and transforming it into genuinely delicious food. Spinach dip, served with crackers and vegetables, was creamy, savory goodness that children scooped up enthusiastically. The rich cream cheese and sour cream base mixed with chopped spinach and seasonings, creating dips that tasted indulgent. Aunties would thaw frozen chopped spinach and squeeze out all the excess water before mixing it with softened cream cheese, sour cream, mayonnaise, dried vegetable soup mix, and sometimes water chestnuts for added crunch. The mixture was stirred together until smooth and well combined, then refrigerated for several hours to allow flavors to meld and develop depth. Some families served the dip cold, while others baked it briefly to create warm, bubbling cheese pulls that made every scoop exciting. In 1970s, Black households, spinach dip represented modern entertaining, recipes that came from package instructions but became beloved traditions. Children loved spinach dip because the vegetables were hidden in creamy richness, making them willing to eat greens. Homemade applesauce cake was a Depression-era recipe that survived into the 1970s for one reason: it worked. Using leftover applesauce, a bit of sugar, and a handful of spices, mothers could bake something fragrant, moist, and comforting without expensive ingredients. The scent of cinnamon and cloves filled the air long before the cake left the oven, drifting into living rooms where children waited for dessert. It baked into a soft, rich texture that stayed fresh for days, even without frosting. Each slice was tender and slightly sticky, perfect with a dusting of powdered sugar or a drizzle of glaze. Families loved it because it tasted like something expensive, even though it wasn't. It was a dessert that carried stories of perseverance, thrift, and gratitude. Applesauce cake wasn't about showing off. It was about showing love, turning the simplest pantry items into something worthy of celebration. It stood quietly on the table beside flashier desserts, but it always disappeared first. Proof that flavor born from simplicity never goes out of style. Pigs in blankets made with cocktail franks wrapped in crescent roll dough emerged from ovens as perfect little packages that children ate by the handful, their small size making them perfect for young appetites and hands that grabbed multiple pieces at once. Mothers would unroll refrigerated crescent dough, separating it along the perforations before cutting each triangle in half to create smaller pieces that wrapped around cocktail-sized hot dogs snugly. The wrapped franks were arranged on baking sheets with the dough seam facing down, sometimes brushed with melted butter or beaten egg for extra golden color. As they baked, the dough puffed up and turned flaky and golden, while the franks inside steamed and stayed juicy, creating combinations of textures that made every bite satisfying. In the 1970s, Black households, pigs in blankets represented quick, crowd-pleasing appetizers. Children loved them because they were perfectly sized for little hands. Rutabaga mashed with potatoes stretched expensive produce while adding nutrition and flavor complexity that plain mashed potatoes couldn't match, making economical side dishes feel more sophisticated. Rutabagas sold for pennies per pound since few shoppers knew how to prepare them, but Black mothers understood that these dense root vegetables could extend potato dishes while adding vitamins and slight sweetness. The rutabaga was peeled, cubed, and boiled alongside potatoes until both were tender, then mashed together with margarine and milk until smooth and creamy. The golden color was prettier than plain white potatoes, while the flavor had subtle sweetness and earthiness that made the dish more interesting. Children often couldn't tell they were eating rutabaga mixed in, accepting it as simply mashed potatoes without resistance. Adults appreciated how one rutabaga could replace half the potatoes needed, cutting costs significantly while actually improving the dish. Which of these 1970s survival recipes do you still remember from your childhood? Share your stories in the comments below, hit the like button, and subscribe so we can keep honoring this legacy of resilience.